The handshake felt different this time. Marcus Chen stood in the office of Whitley County Land and Title on a Tuesday morning in April of 1984, his hand still wrapped around that of Bill Henderson, the man who'd just sold him another 640 acres. That brought Marcus's total to 2,000 acres. Exactly, 2,000 acres that he owned free and clear, no mortgage, no land debt, no bank holding paper on a single square foot of it. The title company clerk was processing the paperwork, and Bill Henderson was pouring coffee, and Marcus was doing math in his head. Math he'd been doing for 10 years, math that nobody had believed would work. He'd started with 100 acres in 1974, 100 acres, and a 1952 Farmall Super M that the John Deere dealers in town had openly mocked him for keeping. "Coffee, Marcus?" Bill asked. "Thanks." Bill handed him the cup, sat down across the desk. "You know, I've been farming 42 years, and I've never seen anyone do what you just did." "What's that?" "Build an operation from 100 acres to 2,000 in 10 years and own every bit of it." Bill shook his head. "Most guys your age are leveraged to their eyeballs, just trying to hold on to what they inherited. You started from scratch and built an empire." Marcus took a sip of coffee. "Wouldn't call it an empire." "What would you call it?" "Sustainable." Bill laughed. "That's one word for it. My word would be impossible, but here we are." The clerk brought over the final documents. Marcus signed his name. Bill signed his. And just like that, Marcus Chen owned 2,000 acres of some of the best farmland in southern Kansas. All of it paid for with cash he'd saved by refusing to do what everyone told him he had to do. All of it built on a strategy that started with one simple decision: keep the old Farmall and don't go into debt. Now, before I tell you how Marcus did this, I need you to understand something. This isn't a story about luck or perfect timing or family money. Marcus Chen came from nothing. His parents were immigrants who ran a small restaurant in Wichita. He had no farming background, no inheritance, no connections. What he had was a mind for numbers and a willingness to be called cheap by every implement dealer in the county. And if you want to know how those two things turned 100 acres into 2,000, hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear is going to challenge everything you think you know about building wealth in agriculture. Let me take you back to the beginning. March 1974. Marcus Chen was 26 years old, working as an accountant in Wichita, and completely miserable. He'd gotten his degree, landed a good job at a mid-sized firm, and discovered within 6 months that sitting in an office adding up other people's money was going to slowly kill his soul. He wanted to build something, own something, create something with his hands that existed in the real world, not just on paper. His father thought he was crazy when Marcus said he wanted to farm. "You don't know anything about farming," his father had said in Mandarin, standing in the kitchen of the family restaurant at 5 in the morning, prepping vegetables for the lunch rush. "I can learn." "With what money?" "Farming takes land. Land costs money we don't have. I've been saving. I've got $18,000. His father had stopped chopping, looked at him. "That's not enough to buy a farm. It's enough to start." And Marcus was right. $18,000 in 1974 could buy you 100 acres if you knew where to look and weren't picky about condition. The land Marcus found was on the eastern edge of Whitley County, 100 acres that had been part of a larger estate, subdivided when the owner died and the heirs couldn't agree on how to split it up. It needed work. The fences were a mess. The barn was half collapsed. No house, just raw ground. But the soil was good drainage, decent topography, workable. Marcus paid $16,000 cash for it, which left him $2,000 for equipment. This is where the story really starts. With $2,000, Marcus couldn't buy new equipment, couldn't even buy decent used equipment from a dealer. but he could buy old equipment from farm auctions and estate sales if he was willing to put in the work. He found the 1952 Farmall Super M at an auction in May of 1974. It was sitting in the back corner of a barn, covered in dust, one tire flat, battery dead. The auctioneer barely mentioned it. "And this old Farmall here, lot 86, sold as is where is, buyer removes. Do I hear 300? Marcus raised his card. Nobody else bid. He got it for $300. Over the next 2 months, working evenings and weekends while he still had his accounting job, Marcus brought that tractor back to life. He'd never worked on an engine before, but he bought manuals, watched other farmers work, asked questions, learned, new battery, oil change, carburetor rebuild, spark plugs, points and condenser, brake adjustment, new tire, complete grease job. Total investment in parts, $240. By July, he had a running tractor for $540 total. Then he started buying implements at auctions, a 2-bottom plow for $120, a disc for $180, a grain drill for $250, a cultivator for $90. By August, Marcus had about $1,200 invested in equipment, and he was ready to farm. He quit his accounting job, moved into a small apartment in town, and started his new life. The John Deere dealer in Whitley heard about it through the grapevine, a new farmer starting out with old international equipment. The dealer, a man named Rick Chambers, thought it was hilarious. "Kid's going to learn the hard way," Rick told people. "You can't build a farming operation on junk equipment and wishful thinking. He'll be broke inside 2 years. Marcus didn't care what Rick Chambers thought. He was too busy learning to farm. He planted 50 acres of wheat that fall and 50 acres of soybeans. He did all his own field work, all his own maintenance. He lived cheap, ate simple, saved every penny. That first year, after expenses, he cleared about $4,000. $4,000 that went straight into savings. Most farmers would have used that money as a down payment on more land or newer equipment, would have leveraged it to expand faster. Marcus did something different. He saved it. Because Marcus the accountant understood something that most farmers didn't want to hear. Compound growth through reinvestment beats leverage through debt every single time, but only if you can resist the temptation to spend. Year 2. Marcus cleared $5,200, saved it all. Year 3, $6,000, saved it all. Year 4, $7,800, saved it all. By the end of 1978, Marcus had $31,000 in the bank, free and clear, earning interest. And that's when he made his first expansion. A neighbor, an older farmer named John Pritchard, wanted to retire but didn't want to sell his land to some out-of-state investor. He had 160 acres adjacent to Marcus's 100. "I'll sell it to you for $40,000, John had told Marcus over coffee. "But I can't carry the contract. I need cash. I'm moving to Arizona to live near my daughter." "I can pay cash," Marcus had said. John had blinked. "You're what, 30 years old? You've got $40,000 cash? I've got $31,000 saved. I can borrow 9 from my parents." "Your parents have that kind of money? They've been saving their whole lives. And they'll lend it to me interest-free if I promise to pay them back within 2 years. John had studied him for a long moment. "You're serious." "I'm serious." They shook hands. Marcus bought the 160 acres for cash, paid his parents back in 18 months, and now he had 260 acres all owned outright. The Farmall Super M was still running strong. Marcus had rebuilt the engine over the winter of '77, done a complete overhaul, and it was pulling his expanded acreage without complaint. Rick Chambers heard about Marcus's expansion and drove out to see him one afternoon. "Marcus, heard you bought the Pritchard place. Congratulations." "Thanks. You know, now that you're getting bigger, you really should think about upgrading your equipment. I've got some good deals on used John Deeres. That old Farmall's going to hold you back." Marcus was greasing the tractor at the time, didn't stop working. Tractor runs fine, but it's not efficient. You could cut your field time in half with something newer. Could I cut my debt in half too? Rick laughed uncomfortably. Debt's just a tool, leverage. It's how you grow. I'm growing just fine. By being cheap, Rick said, and there was an edge to his voice now. By farming with equipment that should be in a museum. By nickel and diming your way through life. Marcus stood up, looked at him. I paid cash for 160 acres last month. How many of your customers can say that? Rick didn't have an answer. He just got back in his truck and drove away. But the story spread. Marcus Chen is cheap. Marcus Chen farms with junk. Marcus Chen thinks he can compete with equipment from the 50s. Marcus didn't argue, just kept farming, kept saving. Here's what I need you to understand, and this is critical. The implement dealers, the banks, the whole agricultural financing system, they're built on the assumption that farmers will spend money to make money, that you need to leverage debt to grow, that cheap equipment means cheap results. But Marcus Chen was proving something different. He was proving that in agriculture, the guy who saves the most grows the fastest, not the guy who spends the most. If this is making sense to you, if you're starting to see the game differently, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what you're saving money on right now that everyone tells you you should be spending on. The years from 1979 to 1984 were the most important years of Marcus's strategy. This was when the farm crisis hit, when interest rates went through the roof, when land values crashed, when farmers who'd expanded on debt lost everything. Marcus watched it happen, watched neighbors foreclose, watched equipment auctions where brand new tractors sold for half what farmers owed on them, watched families pack up and leave land that had been in their families for generations, and Marcus kept saving. 1979, cleared $9,000, saved it. 1980, cleared $11,000, saved it. 1981, cleared $8,000 in a bad year, saved it. 1982, cleared $13,000 when prices bounced back, saved it. By early 1983, Marcus had over $90,000 in savings, and land prices had crashed. Farms that would have cost $100,000 in 1978 were selling for $60,000, $50,000, sometimes $40,000 in foreclosure sales. Marcus started buying. First, 120 acres from a bank foreclosure, paid $38,000 cash. Then, an 80-acre piece that bordered his existing land, paid $29,000 cash. Then another 160 acres from a farmer who was retiring and wanted out before things got worse, paid $54,000 cash. By the end of 1983, Marcus owned 620 acres, all of it paid for with money he'd saved by living cheap and farming with a tractor that the dealers said couldn't compete. Let me pause here and tell you about the Farmall Super M, because this is important. By 1983, that tractor was 31 years old. Marcus had owned it for 9 years, and in those 9 years, he'd rebuilt the engine twice, replaced the clutch once, gone through the hydraulic system, rewired the electrical, painted it twice, and replaced virtually every wear component. Total investment in that tractor over 9 years, about $4,500, including the original purchase price. A farmer who'd bought new in 1974 and traded up every 5 years would have spent over $80,000 in equipment payments alone over that same period. Marcus had saved $75,000 by keeping the old Farmall, and he'd used that $75,000 to buy land that would appreciate in value instead of equipment that would depreciate. That's the strategy nobody talks about. That's the math the dealers don't want you to do. In 1984, when Marcus bought that final 640 acres from Bill Henderson and crossed the 2,000-acre threshold, Rick Chambers drove out to Marcus's farm. Marcus was in the machine shed working on the Farmall, 32 years old at this point, still running, still working. Rick got out of his truck, walked over, stood watching for a minute. "Marcus." "Rick." "Heard you bought the Henderson place." "I did. 2,000 acres now." "That's right." Rick was quiet for a moment. "I owe you an apology." Marcus looked up from the hydraulic line he was replacing. "I called you cheap," Rick continued. "Called your equipment junk. Told people you'd be broke inside 2 years. That was 1974, 10 years ago. I remember. You proved me wrong, proved everybody wrong." Rick walked over to the Farmall, ran his hand along the hood. "This tractor, this cheap old tractor, it built a 2,000-acre operation, and most of my customers who bought new, who financed the best equipment, who did everything I told them to do, they're gone now. Foreclosed, sold out, moved away." Marcus set down his wrench. "It wasn't the tractor that built the operation, Rick. It was the money I didn't spend on tractors. I know that now. Took me 10 years, but I know it. So what are you going to tell your next young farmer who wants to start small and stay out of debt?" Rick thought about it. The truth, that leverage is a gamble, that debt is risk, that sometimes the slowest way forward is the only way that gets you there. Marcus nodded. "Appreciate you saying that." After Rick left, Marcus went back to work on the Farmall. It needed new seals in the hydraulic pump, needed the carburetor adjusted, needed the usual attention that old equipment required. But it ran, and it would keep running, and every dollar Marcus didn't spend replacing it was a dollar he could use to buy more land, or weather a bad year, or simply save for the future. Now let me ask you something, and I really want you to think about this. How much of what you're told you need to spend money on is actually necessary, and how much of it is just someone else trying to make a profit off you? Because that's what Marcus Chen figured out, that most of the pressure to upgrade, to modernize, to spend, it wasn't coming from necessity, it was coming from people who benefited from him spending money. Drop a comment and tell me one thing you're resisting buying right now, even though everyone says you need it. The expansion didn't stop at 2,000 acres. By 1990, Marcus owned 3,200 acres, all of it paid for in cash as land became available and he had the money saved. By 2000, he was at 4,800 acres. By 2010, he'd crossed 6,000 acres. And through all of it, through every expansion, every acquisition, every year of farming, Marcus followed the same strategy: live cheap, save aggressively, buy land only when he had cash, never finance equipment, maintain what he had, resist the pressure to look successful instead of being successful. The Farmall Super M finally retired in 1994 after 42 years of service. Marcus had owned it for 20 years. It had helped him build an empire. He didn't scrap it, didn't sell it. He restored it completely, painted it, made it beautiful, and parked it in a climate-controlled shed on his farm. "That tractor bought my freedom," he told his kids. "Least I can do is preserve it." In 2015, Marcus Chen was invited to speak at a young farmers' conference in Kansas City. He was 67 years old, still farming, still active in his operation. The organizers wanted him to talk about his expansion strategy, about how he'd built one of the largest privately held farming operations in Kansas. Marcus stood at the podium, looked out at 200 young farmers in the audience, and told them the truth. "I didn't build this operation by farming better than everyone else," he said. "I built it by spending less than everyone else. That's the whole secret. That's the entire strategy." He paused. Let that sink in. "In 1974, I had a choice. I could buy new equipment and look like a real farmer, or I could buy old equipment and save the difference. I chose to save the difference, and over the next 10 years, I saved enough money to turn 100 acres into 2,000. But it wasn't easy. People called me cheap, called my equipment junk, said I couldn't compete, and you know what? They were right about the equipment. It was old. It was slow. It wasn't efficient by modern standards. But they were wrong about competing, because I wasn't trying to compete on productivity. I was competing on survivability. And in agriculture, survival isn't about who produces the most. It's about who's still standing when the markets crash and the weather fails and the banks get nervous. A young farmer in the front row raised his hand. But didn't you eventually have to upgrade? You can't farm 6,000 acres with a 1952 Farmall. Marcus smiled. No, you can't. I bought more equipment as I expanded. But I never bought new, and I never financed. I bought used equipment for cash, maintained it well, and replaced it only when necessary. And every dollar I didn't spend on equipment was a dollar I could use to buy land. But that's so slow, another farmer said. That's like, 10 years to get to 2,000 acres? Most guys want to grow faster than that. Most guys lose their farms, Marcus said quietly. Most guys who try to grow fast end up growing broke. Because fast growth requires leverage, and leverage requires debt, and debt requires everything to go right. One bad year, one market shift, one unexpected expense, and leverage crushes you. He looked around the room. How many of you know someone who lost their farm in the 80s? Almost every hand went up. How many of those people had debt? The hands stayed up. That's my point. The game is designed to keep you in debt. The dealers, the banks, the input suppliers, they all profit when you borrow money. They want you to believe that debt is normal, that leverage is necessary, that you can't succeed without financing. But I'm living proof that's a lie. You can succeed. You can build something huge. You can create generational wealth, but only if you're willing to be called cheap while you do it. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. After the speech, dozens of young farmers lined up to talk to Marcus, to ask questions, to get advice, to hear more about how he'd done it. And Marcus told them all the same thing. Save more than you spend. Buy what you can afford, own what you use, and ignore everyone who tells you you're doing it wrong. Marcus Chen is 76 years old now. He still owns his farming operation, though he's semi-retired, and his sons run most of the day-to-day operations. The operation has grown to over 8,000 acres, all of it owned free and clear. No debt, no mortgages, no banknotes. And in a climate-controlled shed on the main farm, the 1952 Farmall Super M sits in perfect condition, a monument to the tractor that started it all. Every year, Marcus takes his grandchildren to see it. He climbs up on the seat, shows them how to work the controls, tells them the story of how this one piece of equipment, this cheap old tractor that the dealers mocked, changed the trajectory of their entire family. They called me cheap for keeping this, Marcus tells them, but cheap is just another word for careful, for intentional, for refusing to waste money on things that don't matter. He runs his hand along the steering wheel, feels the worn metal that his hands shaped over 20 years of use. This tractor taught me that what other people think doesn't matter. What matters is what you build, what you own, what you can pass down. He looks at his grandchildren. And that's worth more than all the new equipment in the world. So let me leave you with this final thought. Right now, someone is trying to sell you something. Equipment, technology, inputs, services, something. And they're telling you that you need it to compete, that you need it to succeed, that you need it to build the farming operation you want. But Marcus Chen proved something different. He proved that what you really need is discipline, patience, the courage to be called cheap while you build wealth. The John Deere dealers called him cheap for keeping his old Farmall. 10 years later, his 100 acres had become 2,000. 20 years later, it was 6,000. 40 years later, it's 8,000 acres of generational wealth that nobody can take away. All because Marcus Chen understood one simple truth. The money you don't spend is more powerful than the money you do. If you got value from this story, if it changed how you think about equipment and debt and building wealth, do 3 things for me. First, hit that subscribe button. Second, share this video with someone who's feeling the pressure to spend money they don't have. Third, drop a comment telling me, what are you going to stop spending money on after hearing Marcus Chen's story? I'll see you in the next one.